Welcome to Breaking the Debt Cycle, Gaining Your Financial Freedom from Credit Cards.
Hello and welcome to Breaking the Debt Cycle, Gaining Your Financial Freedom from Credit Cards. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is all about Chapter 7 bankruptcy, a crucial option for those looking to get a fresh financial start. Joining me is experienced bankruptcy attorney Michael Sheridan, who is here to break down everything you need to know about Chapter 7, including how it works, who it's best suited for, and what to expect when considering this route. Michael, welcome back.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
So we talked a little bit about Chapter 7 in our last episode, but we're going to kind of deep dive it. But let's refresh everyone's memory. What exactly is Chapter 7 and who is it best suited for?
So Chapter 7 is the bankruptcy that most people think of when they hear the word bankruptcy. It's kind of the classic bankruptcy. And it's called Chapter 7 because actually in the Old Testament, they had what was called the year of Jubilee. And so every 7 years, members would have their debts wiped out as a matter of course. And so Chapter 7 actually gets its name from the Bible.
Wow, that's crazy. We should go back to that, by the way.
And then the year of Jubilee was every seventh year or 49 years, even people outside of the group, foreigners would have their debts wiped out as well. So that was the year of Jubilee. So anyway, a little background there for you.
All right. Hey, I didn't know that. So that's a nice little tidbit. I like it.
Yeah. So Chapter 7 is really, it's really for anyone who is struggling to make their debt payments and also pay necessary living expenses. That is really what this body of law is designed to help people do. And so what you're doing is you're essentially just breaking the debt cycle that a lot of people find themselves trapped in. And a lot of well-intentioned people, we all use credit cards, or most of us use credit cards, and, we use them responsibly. You make your monthly payments, you charge them responsibly. Sometimes expenses come up, car repairs, medical bills. Oh, I had to take the dog to the vet or whatever. And you make your payments on them and the interest rate keeps going up. But hey, as long as you're able to make your payments, everything's okay. Well, what happens is eventually that debt grows so high because of these crazy interest rates we have right now that your payments, your minimum payments get so high that you're using so much of your income to pay towards these credit cards that you no longer have enough income coming in to address all of your living expenses. So what happens? You end up turning back to these credit cards to pay living expenses, using your income to pay your credit cards and your credit cards to pay your living expenses. And you're just on this cycle of using credit cards to pay living expenses, and you're paying the banks 30% interest just for the benefit of keeping the lights on and a roof over your head. And if you find yourself in that debt cycle and you can't find a way out, Chapter 7 is here to help you get back on your feet and get a fresh start. And so there are incoming qualifications built around Chapter 7. And so the primary mechanism that this is done is through the means test. The means test is a very mechanical calculation of your past 6 months of gross income. They take a 6-month snapshot and they essentially double it. And they say, this is your projected annual gross income. And it's income from all sources, regardless of whether it's taxable or not. So, contributions that you might get from a roommate or a significant other, their share of the expenses, employment income, obviously, child support, VA, disability, all of those things. The one exception to that is Social Security, and I can come back to that. But for our purposes here, I'll just speak more generally. So they come up with a projected annual gross based on your previous 6 months of gross income. Once we have that projected annual gross, we then weigh it against the median income for your household size. So the more people in your household, the higher the median income goes up. So right now, the median income for a household of one in Minnesota is right around $70,000. Every 6 months, the U.S. Trustee's Office, which is kind of the department of the Department of Justice that oversees the bankruptcy qualifications, they revise these numbers every 6 months based on census data and IRS data that they have. And they say, okay, here's the median income for the households across the various states. Each state has different median income numbers from different states. In Minnesota right now, it's right around $70,000 for a household of one. So if your projected annual gross is higher than the median income for your household size, then we move over to the second part of the means test. On the second part of the means test, we're trying to net out the monthly expenses to determine whether or not you have the means to do a Chapter 13 payment plan. The problem with the second part of the means test is a lot of those expenses that we get to use are standardized numbers on what the IRS says a household of your size spends in the area that you live in. And so for food and utilities and clothing, those are all standardized numbers. And you've probably guessed they don't really track with the real world and increase as rapidly as inflation and things like that. So in my experience, if you're more than about $5,000 over the median income, we probably can't get you qualified for a Chapter 7 under the means test. Now, that's not always the case. There are some expenses on the second part of the means test that we can actually use real numbers, things like daycare expenses, mortgage payments, car payments, if you have tax debt, things like that. We can get those numbers in there. Unfortunately, student loans we can't use on the means test. But it always makes sense to talk to somebody. Don't just assume that you don't qualify, because you might be surprised to learn there might be exception if Social Security is one of your sources of income. Social Security for purposes of the means test actually doesn't count as income. So you might be able to qualify still. But if you do meet those qualifications, either on the first level or the second level, there's also a third level. It gets a little bit complicated and kind of comes into how much of your debt would be calculated to be paid through a Chapter 13 and all those kinds of things. There's also some special circumstances that can be used. To not bore you to death, I'm not going to go into those, but by and large, the means test is the primary mechanism the court's using to determine whether or not a person or a married couple qualifies for Chapter 7. If you don't meet those qualifications, then you still do have bankruptcy relief available to you through a Chapter 13. And that's really a payment plan that you organize. It's very often a much better payment than what all of your credit card payments would be. But certainly Chapter 7 is the preferred method because you're able to kind of get this whole situation behind you so much more rapidly and really start moving forward and hit a financial reset button and just be able to move forward with a fresh start.
We're going to be doing an episode on Chapter 13. So I like the teaser, Michael. I like the teaser. That's good.
Right.
Get everybody excited for it. So what kind of debts can be discharged under Chapter 7 and what can't?
Sure. So Chapter 7 is very good at discharging unsecured debt. So unsecured debt is things where the lender does not have a lien in some kind of collateral. So credit cards, medical bills, personal loans, lines of credit that don't have liens and collateral. An example of a secured debt would be like a mortgage. The mortgage lender has a lien in your house. If you don't make payments on your mortgage, they have the right to foreclose on their lien interest and take the property back. Similar with a car loan. The vehicle lender has a lien in the vehicle. So if you file for bankruptcy and you have a mortgage or a car loan, you can keep those debts. Those are secured debts, and then discharge all of your credit card debt, your medical bills, unsecured obligations. Now, the court is trying to accomplish two main goals with any bankruptcy filing. They want to give you a fresh start, and they want to treat all of your creditors equally. So towards the goal of treating all of your creditors equally, bankruptcy is an all or nothing event. You can't pick and choose which credit cards you want to file on. You can't say, hey, I want to get rid of these 5, but I want to keep these 2. It's an all or nothing event.
Right.
So if now that being said, if you have a card that has a 0 balance on it on the date we file your case, it's not considered a debt and it's not automatically included in the bankruptcy. Now, that being said, that particular creditor is going to see the bankruptcy filing on your credit report, and they may have a policy of either lowering your credit limit or maybe even closing the account on you entirely. So we can't guarantee that the accounts will stay open. But that being said, you can't pick and choose who you're filing bankruptcy on. Also important to understand is there are certain exceptions, certain debts that are accepted from discharge. These are things like child support. Taxes actually can be dischargeable in bankruptcy. They have to meet certain criteria. Income taxes that are more than 3 years old and meet the other criteria can be discharged. Any income taxes that are less than 3 years old are non-dischargeable. Student loans actually potentially can be discharged through bankruptcy. The problem is the standard to get them discharged is so incredibly high. So by default, student loans are deemed to be non-dischargeable. But you have the option of bringing a separate lawsuit through your bankruptcy called an adversary proceeding. And the point of that adversary proceeding is to convince the judge that it would be an undue hardship on you and your family if these student loans were not discharged with the rest of your debt. The problem with that is the standard the court uses for undue hardship is very, very difficult to reach. And without going into too much boring detail, essentially, if you're employable, the judge is going to say, sorry, you have high student loan payments, but it looks like you can afford to pay something on these student loans while also meeting your living expenses. So we're not going to discharge those for you. And so it's very difficult to do. And so pretty much student loans are non-dischargeable for most people. There are a few other exceptions as well that are pretty rare. So for example, if you were found liable for an injury or a death of another person due to drunk driving, that would be carved out as well. Those kinds of things. But the exceptions are pretty much just that. They're the exceptions. By and large, the rule is you can pretty much discharge all of your unsecured debt, save for those small categories.
Are there certain assets that might be at risk or more at risk during a Chapter 7 filing?
So really, the way we protect assets is under what we call the exemption laws. And so we have two different bodies of law that we can use in Minnesota: federal exemptions, Minnesota state exemptions. They both mechanically work the same way. They each identify categories of assets and put caps on how much those assets are worth that you can protect. If the assets that you have are beyond what we have protection for, then any amount beyond that protection cap is considered unprotected, or in the language of the court, non-exempt. And basically those non-exempt amounts either have to be turned over to a court official called a trustee, or much more commonly, just work out a payment plan with the trustee. At the end of the day, the trustee has a duty to get funds for your creditors from your unprotected assets. And so they're not just going to look the other way, but they would much rather just work out a payment plan with you, a reasonable payment plan, rather than take the asset. They get no benefit from taking something that's unprotected. Right. They'd rather just work with you and work out the payment plan. So there's no specific asset where we say, ooh, that's absolutely not protected. There are assets that are not categorically, they don't fit within those categories. But then each body of law that we use, both the federal exemptions and the Minnesota state exemptions, they each have a wild card category of protection. Under the federal exemptions, it can be as high as $15,450. That amount is actually connected to how much equity in your home you're protecting. If you have more than about 15 for an individual to 30 for a married couple of equity in your home, then that wildcard amount starts to go down to a minimum of about $1,500. Under the Minnesota state exemptions, we have about $1,500 of wildcard protection. And so in cases like that, where we have more equity, and we're usually using the Minnesota state exemptions, where you can protect up to $480,000 of equity in your home. And again, that's equity, not just total value. That's the value over and above the balance of the mortgage. If you have an unprotected asset, then we're usually timing out the filing of your case. And if it's something like, for example, we've got tax season coming up. Well, the way the court conceives of tax refunds is that we are earning those tax refunds as we progress throughout the year. So even though we're all the way through the previous year, the court says, well, you've earned 100% of next year of that tax refund, even though you're not going to file those tax returns until February, March, April, whatever. And you're not going to get the refund until after you file the returns. The court says, well, you've earned it as soon as you've gone throughout the year, or you've earned whatever corresponding percentage you are through this current year. So if you're expecting a really large tax refund, we might say, well, let's hold off on filing your case, file your tax returns, receive your tax refund, spend it on what you and your family need it for, whatever living expenses you are. A lot of people will buy, go school shopping or do car maintenance or home maintenance, whatever they might need that money for. As long as it's a reasonable and necessary living expense, you can go ahead and use that money. And then we file the case, and now it's no longer an asset that we have to protect. So that can be kind of a timing thing that we do to maximize our clients' protections in a Chapter 7.
Can you talk about what the automatic stay is and how it helps people file for Chapter 7?
Absolutely. So there's two important court orders in a Chapter 7. The first one is an automatic stay. The order for automatic stay goes into effect automatically upon your case being filed, and it stays or stops any kind of collection action against you. Calls, letters, lawsuits, garnishments, demands for payment, automated payments out of your bank account, things of that nature, anything. And it actually also prevents your creditors from to continue to report a balance due on your credit report. So the automatic stay can be an incredibly valuable tool for people who are being garnished. So one of the groups of people I help are people who've been struggling with debt for a while, and it's gotten to the point where the creditor has started garnishing their wages. And so Minnesota is one of 4 states in the country that allows what is called hip pocket service. And what that means is in Minnesota, all you need to do to start a lawsuit against somebody is draft a summons and a complaint and serve it on them. And once they're served with that summons and complaint, a clock starts ticking. Once you're served, you have 21 days to answer or respond to the allegations in the complaint. In Minnesota, if you do not answer the complaint within 21 days, the plaintiff under the complaint now has grounds for what is called a default judgment. Once they get their default judgment, they then can legally garnish up to 25% of your wages. Now, a lot of people I meet with think, well, hey, I just got served with the summons and complaint. I'll wait till I get a notice from the court of when the hearing is. We'll go in, we'll explain it to the judge, we'll work out some kind of settlement, payment plan, everything will be fine. That's not how it works in Minnesota. In Minnesota, if you don't respond within 21 days, nothing's filed with the court until after that 21 days ends. That is when the plaintiff's law firm is going to file the paperwork with the court that says, hey, judge, we served this person and alleged all these things in this complaint. 21 days has passed and they have not responded or put forth any kind of defense. They haven't disputed what we alleged. And so we win by default. And as long as they can show that you're not in active military service or some other kind of thing and that you were properly served, then the judge will say, okay, default judgment in your favor. And now you'll start getting garnished. That's when you get served with the garnishment notice and your payroll is telling you, hey, sorry, we got to take 25% of your paycheck and send it over here. Well, on the day your Chapter 7 is filed, that automatic stay stops that from going forward. And we can actually oftentimes, if you've been getting garnished a couple pay cycles by the time you come in to meet with us and we file your case, we can oftentimes actually claw back some of the money, if not all of the money that was garnished you within the 90 days prior to filing. So it's an extremely powerful tool that people can use to really move forward on that fresh start. And again, the goal is to snap that debt cycle where you no longer have to use so much of your income to pay the credit cards. You can now cut out that middleman and use your income to pay your living expenses.
Right. Yeah. That's the goal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to Debt Cycle, Gaining Your Financial Freedom from Credit Cards with experienced attorney Michael Sheridan. To connect with Mike, head to atlasbankruptcy.com and please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review if you get a chance. Michael, always great to hear from you. Looking forward to the next one.
Always a pleasure, Kevin. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.